right, so I think we're ready to go ahead and get started. Hopefully everybody's joined up, and let me see, we've got 9 people on the call. So today we're going to talk about dimensioning, and this is where the class really picks up because we're going from just doing multi-views to also adding dimensions to everything. And out there in the real world and industry, the dimensions drive everything. So dimensioning is really important. And there are a lot of rules about dimensioning that you're going to have to learn or at least live by. And you're also going to have to learn how to create a dimension style, what we call a dimension style in AutoCAD. And so we'll be talking about that. And so I think the best thing to do probably will be for me to just go ahead and open up a PowerPoint thing that I have open. Let's see if I've got it here. And go ahead and present that to your monitors. Get my mouse. Okay. Let me present this. All right, so hopefully you're seeing a screen that talks about a dimensioning definition on there. And if you're not, somebody let me know that. I'm having trouble seeing what my screen is. There we go. Now I can see what my screen is presenting. So, so dimensions are this information we add to a drawing to describe the size and the location of the features of a part. All right, so that's the definition of what a dimension is. And since the first thing we're going to dimension is the bracket, kind of want to focus in on that and look at those dimensions that you used when you drew this part. And you're going to place those same dimensions on the views of the bracket here in a few minutes. And so there's some things that we want to think about, some terminology. And one is a thing called a feature. And what a feature is it's something like a hole or a plane, or it could be an edge, it could be a slot. You know, there's a lot of things that could qualify as features. And generally what we try to do is dimension things on a feature by feature basis. And so, like we say, a feature is a geometric element that is added to a base part, slot, surface, edge, or hole. All right. And dimensions are essential in the manufacture, inspection, repair, and assembly of these parts. And so using the dimensions that we had here on our bracket, you are able to completely draw the views of this object. And so the goal of a designer is to make sure that they include enough information that someone could actually manufacture that part. And if you can draw it from their dimensions, there's a pretty good chance that you could also make it from those same dimensions. So the dimensions that you see on a drawing, you have to figure that those were determined by a designer. Could have been an engineer, could just be a designer, and that the designer has something in mind which we call design intent. And it's like, what is the intention of the designer to place those holes where they are, or to place those slots where they are, so on like that. And we have to assume, even if we don't know what their design intention is that they had something in mind. And so what we want to do is to reproduce their design intention, right? And we don't want to change their design intention. And so if we were being paid to make a technical drawing of the bracket, we would want to include all of the necessary views. And in this case, you've already drawn those. That would be your front, your top, your side. And then you would want to add all the dimensions and notations required to manufacture the part. Now, right down here, this is a good example of a notation where it says that your material is mild steel. It would be necessary to know what the material is for this part in order to manufacture the part. So you cannot leave off things that are required to manufacture the part. Okay, so if anybody has a question, feel free to, to unmute and ask me a question. So here's kind of the dimensioning basics. If you look at the bracket and you see that it has 15 dimensions and one note, then what you need to do is add the same 15 dimensions plus the note to the views, fill out your title block, and you should be good to go. So you've got to make sure that you put exactly the same dimensions on here as you see in the designer's sketch. But there are a few more things to this that kind of complicate that whole process. Okay, so the first is that the drafter must ensure that the value of each of the 15 dimensions is represented on the drawing with the exact precision. By that we mean the number of decimal places. So for example, right up here we have 2.70. So this is at 2 places of precision. The 0.60, that's at 2 places of precision. That's exactly what your drawing needs to show when you put your dimensions in. And all of that is controlled by your dimension settings and your dimension style. Now over here we have 2 holes. It says 2 times diameter 0.625. So this would be a 3-place precision right here. And you need to make sure that AutoCAD doesn't round that and write, for example, 0.63 when the designer has indicated that that's 0.625. The reason for that is that the precision defines what the tolerance is that may be applied to that feature. Now that feature is a hole. And so what is a tolerance? A tolerance is this little bit of error that we allow because it's really hard to make something exactly 0.625. So what we can say is, well, let's make it 0.625 plus or minus 1/100th of an inch, for example. Okay, that would be an example of a tolerance. So we actually give the manufacturer a little bit of leeway to not make the part perfect, all right, because it's almost impossible to make a part exactly perfect. So part of what we're going to talk about in Chapter 5 are tolerances, which really drive the whole thing. And but you don't know much about that yet, so we'll kind of put that off. So you can see I've got 2-place precision here, 3-place precision here. So that's one of the first things. The second thing that you have to do is your dimensions should reference the same datum features shown on the designer sketch. So a datum feature is an element like an edge, a plane, an axis, a point, a hole, could be surface or surfaces, or other geometric feature that serves as a reference for defining the geometry. Now what I mean by that is this. If you look right here, it says this plane, and it's pointing down right here, this plane right here, that surface serves as a datum for the dimension labeled 1.25 right there. Okay, that's where we want to measure from. That's what the designer has said, that the centers of those holes should be measured from this surface right here. So that becomes the datum edge right there. So we want to look for other datums in here, and you could probably find some, for example, the location of this slot that we have right here is located 0.75 from the front edge, because we have this radius of 0.75. The datum would be the front edge located to 0.75, and then the side over here, if you moved in 0.75, those 2 corners would be considered datums as well. Okay, so in this case right here, this plane right here, this vertical plane serves as a datum for the dimension labeled 1.95. Okay, so when we locate these holes, we're locating them from this edge here, we go over 1.95, and then we go up 1.25. Same way on the opposite side, we measure in 1.95 and then we measure up 1.25. Those are datums. Okay. So the next thing we want to think about when placing a dimension is the view where we ought to place the dimension. And we want to place the dimension in the view that will most clearly describe what the dimension is related to. And so, as I wrote here, for inexperienced drafters, this is sometimes a difficult decision to make. But the best view for locating each of the dimensions circled in red here would be the front view, because those features would appear in what we call the profile view. All right. So a profile view, for example, would be if we had a part that went across straight like that and then went off at an angle like this and then went down. That right there, that would be the profile of that chamfer. If we saw that chamfer in the side view and it just looked like a line and a line like that, but we knew this was an inclined plane right here, this would not be as good of a place to put that dimension as this view here where we see the profile view. Obviously, where we see a hole as a circle, that's the profile view. So that's why we're saying you should dimension to the center of this hole in the front view, and this one will be dimensioned in the front view. But let me go here. The things circled in blue right here would be dimensioned in the top view, because you don't see those slots in their profile view till you look down on them from the top view. Does that make sense? So this is how you kind of decide what view to put your dimensions on. So we know that there are 15 dimensions in this project and there's one note. And what you guys have to do is decide where's the best place to put those 15 dimensions. Now the note is easy. The note is the note tells us what the material is. We're going to put it to the left of the title block. All right. So we'll put it on the text layer, for example. All right. So whenever you start dimensioning, there are some industry-wide guidelines for spacing and formatting dimensions. And those are called the ASME Y14.5. And so you're going to read about those. I'm going to give you guys a reading assignment. But the standard in North America anyway for dimensioning of mechanical parts like what we're drawing right now is called ASME Y14.5. And you apply the one that's called ASME Y14.5M when we're dimensioning things that are in the metric system in millimeters. All right. So really, dimensions break down into two types. You have size dimensions. So for example, the diameter of this hole right here, where it says it's 2 times 0.625, that is a size dimension. The width of this part right there, that 0.60, that's a size dimension. The distance from side to side on our part right here, the 6.00, that's a size dimension. This dimension here, 2 times 1.25, which tells us how far to come up from this surface to place that hole, that would be a location. And so, like I said, you have two types of dimensions, size and location. So over here, this 1.20, when you came over 1.20 and then you went down 0.25 to get to that corner right there, both of those would be considered location dimensions. So the ASME Y14.5-2009 dimensioning standard, if you bought a copy of it, this is what the front cover would look like. Most folks now would just go to the ASME website with a credit card and they would download the ASME Y14.5 dimensioning standard. And the last time I looked, it cost about $140. But you can do an instant download to your computer if you've got a credit card. You can also pay for the hard copy booklet and they will mail it to you. And so anyway, that's the standard that we use in here. And it tells you that it defines guidelines for spacing, formatting, and placement of dimensions. Now, most offices that you would work in, if you were a mechanical designer, they would have access to a copy of this or multiple copies of this. And so if you were dimensioning something and you weren't sure how it should be dimensioned, you can look it up in the ASME Y14.5 standard. All right. So we're going to look at the views that you'll soon be putting dimensions on. So just the terminology, we already know about dimension lines. Those are lines that have arrowheads on them. And so I want to give you a rule about dimension lines. If it has an arrowhead on it, you shouldn't cross it with anything else, okay? So you can see none of these dimension lines, anything with an arrowhead on it is not crossed by anything else. Now, an extension line, like this line right here, those guys can be crossed. And so that's what we have right here. Here's an extension line, and this is an extension line coming out right here. So those can cross, but we don't want any line to come up here and cross over a dimension line. So that also helps you with placement of your dimensions. So we have dimension lines, we have dimension lines, we have dimension text, we have arrowheads, we have, you see this extension line comes up here and extends a little bit past that arrowhead. That's called extend beyond dimension line. There's actually a setting in AutoCAD that you're going to have to know about when you put that in. So I'm going to talk about that, and also the videos are going to cover that. You have a little bit of an offset when you bring an extension line out. And so this little gap that you have right here, that is a dimension setting. So we'll talk about that, all that kind of stuff. So we've got a diameter symbol. We have a radius symbol, which is the R. We have a time symbol, which is this X right here. So when we say 2X, we're talking about 2 times. And then we'll have a space, and we'll say, for example, R 0.75. That's a radius of 0.75. All right. So the X in this case means 2 times. Sometimes it's going to mean something else. Let's say that you have a chamfer. The chamfer size might be 0.06, and then you have the X, and in this case it means by, BY, 45 degrees. All right. So sometimes X means by, like 2 by 4. That's an example of an X meaning by. And sometimes it means times, 2 times R 0.75. So it's all about the context of that when you see that. So what we try to do is place our dimensions in the profile view of a feature. We don't dimension to hidden lines or the center lines of hidden holes, slots, or other features. Whenever possible, we group the dimensions together. We avoid drawing extension lines and leaders through dimension lines. Remember I said if it has an arrowhead on it, you shouldn't cross it. We avoid placing dimensions on the object unless it's absolutely necessary. And so here's an example of a part that's been dimensioned that follows all those rules. So we've dimensioned everything in the profile view. We haven't crossed through any of our dimensions. We've grouped dimensions together. And so the next slide is going to show you the same drawing where all those rules are violated. And I want you to just look at the difference. So kind of get this in your mind, how easy that is to follow. And then look at this same project dimensioned poorly. So here's an example where you're running your leader through your dimensions. You don't have your dimensions grouped. You don't have them between the views. You've got dimensions on the part. You're dimensioning to the center of a hidden line over here. The center, I'm sorry, of a hidden hole. So, and right here, this 1.00, we have an inclined plane right here. And that should have been dimensioned down here in the profile view. So I'm going to go back to the good example, which is here. Okay. So you see how much better this looks right here than the other one? So the goal of this section of the course is to help you start thinking like this, like how do you place dimensions in the right place where they're easy for the manufacturers to follow, and that takes some practice to get that done. Okay, so here we can see a comparison of those two, and I've already shown you that. Okay. The last part of what I'm going to talk about before I show you some AutoCAD is when you place your first dimension, there is a space according to the ASME standard that we need to be sure that we allow for in here, the minimum distance between the edge of the part and the first dimension is 0.4 inches. Okay, and if we're in a metric drawing, that would be the equivalent of 10 millimeters. So we need 0.40 for the first one. So that would mean the distance from this edge to there also needs to be at least 0.40. So for your first dimension, 0.40. Then the standard says that from this dimension to the next dimension, you need to have a minimum of 0.25 inches, or if it's in the metric system, 6 millimeters. So this minimum distance between these two dimension lines right here would be 0.25. Now, because that's a minimum, we can go farther than that. And usually we will, because 0.25 is a little bit crowded, I think, so we usually go farther than that. Now look right here, here's another thing, a standard, like how long should arrowheads be? Well, what we do is we match the length of our arrowheads to the dimension text height. So if we're using 0.125 text height in here, we're going to match those arrowheads as 0.125. Right down here, when we draw an extension line, you see that amount that it goes past the arrowhead? We want to set that somewhere between 1/10 of an inch and 1/8 of an inch. And the difference in the metric system, that would be 2.5 millimeters or 3 millimeters. Now the reason I'm pointing out these metric spacings and minimums is when you dimension the shaft guide, if you remember, we drew that in millimeters, so we're going to be, these spacings and everything are going to be done using the metric system. Now, when you extend an extension line out, like here, down here, you need to have a gap, a visible gap right here, a little space, and that gap is usually set somewhere between 0.032 and 0.062 inches. So in chapter 5, we actually tell you what to use for these spaces, and we give you all these dimension settings. So we'll get to that in a minute. And then when you have a leader, you have a thing right here. It's like that little platform, and then the leader comes up with an arrow on it. This is called a landing right there. And your leader should include a landing. And so you don't want to ever come out of a dimension without a landing. So let's say that you've got 1.00, and then you just come straight out of that with a leader like that. You always want to come out with a landing and then point to where you're going. So that guy right there, usually we draw that landing about 0.25. And the important thing on any of these is that whatever spacing you're using, use the same spacing on every view. That's what makes your drawings look good. Okay, so the dimension text height should not be less than 0.12 inches or 3 millimeters. And so we have all that set up for you guys. So we're going to get into that in just a second. So what I think I'm going to do is go ahead and get out of PowerPoint and go to AutoCAD 2021. Let me drag this over here. Okay, so are you guys seeing AutoCAD right now? Can somebody tell me? No, okay. All right, thanks. So what I need to do, I'm going to let's see if you can see this now. All right, so it looks like you're seeing AutoCAD now. All right, so let me open up a drawing that I want to get open here. I want to start with the bracket, if I've got it right down here. All right, so of course our assignment was to draw the front, the top, and the right side view of the bracket in chapter 4. And so your first assignment today is you're going to be opening up the bracket that you drew in chapter 4, and you're going to create a dimension style. And after you create the dimension style, you're going to put dimensions on these views. And so I made a video showing you step by step how you place all the dimensions on here. But I want to show you a couple of things before I turn you loose to work on that. So the other day we opened the dimension toolbar, and this is what it looks like. And I'm going to put it back over here. Now, if you don't see your dimension toolbar and you want to get it open, you can come up here where it says Tools, and then you can go to Toolbars, and you can go to AutoCAD, and because they're in alphabetical order, you'll see Dimension right here, and you can turn that on. Now, hopefully, all your toolbars are still turned on. There are more dimension tools right here in the annotation panel, and if you pick on the down arrow right up here, you can see angular dimensions, radius, diameter, and so on like that. Okay. So the other thing that's going to be important is that you make a new layer. And the new layer is going to be called Dimensions. And then you want to set it current. And you want its line weight to be 0.25. Okay. Now, once you've got your dimension layer set, you need to make a dimension style. The dimension style is where you set the text height for your dimensions. You set the arrowhead size. You set all those spacing things that I told you guys about. And the way to create a dimension style is to come right down here and pick on this bottom arrow of your dimension toolbar. And what that does, it opens this guy up right here. This is your dimension style manager. You can also do the same thing by picking on the down arrow. Let me get out of that. If you go to the annotation tab and you pick on that down arrow and you pick on ASME small radii, it will just say standard in your case probably. You pick on that, it will open it up as well. All right. So the videos are going to show you how to make a dimension style. And I've already made a dimension style called ASME small radii. And that is what the first dimension style is going to be that you make. And you'll want to watch the video on how to do that. But just to show you what some of these settings look like, I'm going to pick on Modify. And so if we go to Lines over here, for example, the settings that we want to have are baseline spacing of 0.38. That's how far apart that your dimensions are going to be. And I said a minute ago when I was talking about the minimum spacing, I said that's 0.25, but we're going to go beyond that. We're going to set that to like 0.38. We may even set it to 0.4. You know, remember these are minimums, so we can go up beyond that. Extend beyond dimension line, we're setting to 0.125, and that is the extension, how far out these lines go past the arrowhead. And then the offset from origin is that little gap that we're going to have right in there. That we're going to set that to 0.625. Symbols and arrows, the arrow size is going to be set right here to 0.125. We want this to be set to line, and that's what gave us that center mark that I showed you guys the other day. If you go to text, we want our text style to be standard. We want the text height to be 0.125. So remember I said that text height and arrow size should match each other. So that's what we're having right here. Some of these other settings you'll see in the video. On the Fit tab, this is what determines whether you have a small radius or a large radius style. And so for a small radius, which is what I'm showing you here, you're going to check this box that says either text or arrows beside the dimension line. Use the overall scale of 1. And like I said, don't worry too much about this. It will be in the video, and you can watch all of these settings. When you're done with that, you can close. And so now I'm ready to start dimensioning. And just to give you an example of how dimensions work, right up here, for example, that top tool right there is a linear dimension. So I'm going to pick on linear. I'm going to zoom in on my front view. And the first dimension I'm going to put is the height right here. And the way you do that is you pick on that corner and then pick on this corner second, and then move your cursor down and move out like this and pick. See how easy that is? Now remember though, I said there's an ASME standard. for how far out your first dimension needs to be. And the first dimension needs to be at least 0.4 inches. So what you could do to find out what that is, you could pick on offset, and you could type 0.4 and press enter. And you could pick this red line and pick to the right of it. So the distance from here to there is 0.4. If I pick on my dimension, you see the grip, the little blue grip that I've got right there. If I drag that over and snap to the midpoint of that red line, then I know for sure that my dimension is 0.40 right here. And I could pick right there and delete out that red line, and that would give me the location of my first dimension, and I know it would be 0.4. Another way to find the 0.4 would be this. I'm going to delete this guy out. Go over here and use linear dimension like you normally would. Pick right there, and just move to your right and pick. Then pick on that dimension and drag it with your left click button back and set it right on the red line, but you can see it's still selected. Then pick it and hold down and drag it out in this direction right there and type 0.4 and press enter. So I can, if I bring it all the way back to here and then I drag it, type 0.4, I can actually snap it over there to being 0.4. So that's two ways you can do it. You can use the offset of 0.4, or you can place the dimension, drag it onto the visible line, and then drag it to the right and type 0.4 and press enter. Okay, now once I have that first one in there, if I want to place that 0.125, which is the height from this edge here up to there, what I would do is I would go over here to my dimension toolbar, and I have this option right here. This is a continue dimension right here. I want to pick on continue, and look what it does. It picks up right where that last dimension ended. And what I want to do is go to the center of that hole. Here's how you would select the center of the hole. I'm going to come right in here and I'm going to snap to that quadrant right there. Now, AutoCAD may say it found an intersection, and that's okay, but I'm going to pick right there. And then AutoCAD thinks I want to keep putting dimensions, so I'm going to press escape because I don't want to put another dimension. So you see this dimension right here, we dimensioned to the quadrant. The reason we did not dimension to the center is this. I'm going to drag this over to the center and show you what happens. If you dimension to the center, this line runs through that gap that you want to have here. That is why we dimension to the quadrant instead of to the center right there. If you dimension to the center like that, and you don't have that gap in there, when you hand this drawing in, I would circle that with a red pen and put a -1 on it. Okay, we want to keep 4 spaces around the center marks, and that's why we really have to center dimension to the quadrants and not to the centers. All right, so if I want to dimension from, let's say, this corner here to the center of this guy here, what I might do is do a dimension from this corner, go to that quadrant, and then move up here and place that. Okay, now it looks like I didn't quite get, see how something happened. It jumped to a weird, this should be 0.95, but I want to show you something about your dimensions. They're very editable. If you pick on that and you pick and drag it to the corner where it snaps to the end point, that should have fixed that right there. Okay, so some of these dimensions, though, we need to say 2x for 2 times on them. And so the way that you add text in is this. If you go in here and you double click on a dimension, you can see there's a cursor blinking right in front of that. If I type 2 and a capital X and put a space, and then right up here it says close text editor, if I pick on that. So that's how I can get, text in front of a dimension if I want it. Now, what we have right here is 2-place precision on these. And the reason we have 2-place precision is this. I'm going to pick on my dimension style again, and I'm going to go to modify, and I'll show you. When you look at the tabs you have up here, you have one called primary units. And one of the things that I saw when I looked at those 15 dimensions on the bracket is that most of them go to 2 decimal places. There's only a couple that go to 3 decimal places. So I would go to 2 decimal places for my default setting for my precision. So you can choose as many as you want, but I'm going to set it to 2 and pick OK and then close. So that's why so far every dimension that I've put in has gone to 2 decimal places. But I know that this hole right here needs to be at 3 decimal places. It's 0.625. So because it's a hole, what I'm going to use is my diameter tool, which is right here. Or I can go up here to my annotation tab and pick on this down arrow and pick diameter. And again, I'll show you all this in the video, so you'll get a chance to watch all this. But what it says is to select the arc or the circle. So you would pick right there. And you'll notice that I have a leader coming off of that that already says diameter. AutoCAD is smart enough to know that that is a circle that it's dimensioning to. Plus, I'm using the diameter tool right here to dimension with. So I'm going to place that guy right there. And I have 2 of those holes, so it needs to say 2 times. So I'm going to double click on it. And you can see the cursor blinking right in front of it. So I'm going to do a 2 and a capital X and a space. And then I'm going to close my text editor. Now, the other thing though, if you look at the sketch for this, you would see that that is given in 3 decimal places. So the designer gave us that dimension to 3 places, so we need to dimension to 3 places. And so if I look on page, I'm actually looking on page 296 of the book right now, which is where the bracket project begins for dimensioning it. I can see that that says 2 times diameter 0.625. So I want to make sure that this is 3 decimal places. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Just move your mouse onto it and pick with your left button. Then right click your mouse. So you move down here to where it says precision. There's 1 decimal place, 2 decimal places, and 3 decimal places. Pick right there. So we just changed that 1 dimension to being 0.625. All right. So there's an example of having 2 place precision and having 3 place precision on the same drawing. I'm going to go up to my top view, and in the top view we're going to be dimensioning these slots. As I said, that's where your profile view would be. And if you looked at the top of page 296 and you look at how the slot is dimensioned, you would see that we need a radius dimension right here. And so I'm going to actually go right over here and find my radius tool. So this is my diameter tool, right? There is my radius tool. I can also find that right up here by picking on this down arrow and going to radius. And then it says select the arc or circle. So I would pick right here and I would move out here and just pick. Now, I want to show you something. When I put that dimension in, you can see AutoCAD added center lines. So, you know, we had already put center lines in. But it might be that we don't even need to put center lines in now that you know a little bit more about dimensions. So let me show you what would happen if I hadn't put those. If I knew that the center marks were going to go in when I put my dimension in, I might not have put those in when I was drawing it. So instead, what I would do is come pick on the radius tool, pick right there on that arc, which we drew that as a fillet, and look at that, AutoCAD automatically drew that. Now, the problem with it is that it also added those, and it drew up and it took out that gap that I want to have right there. And about the only way to edit this guy would be I would have to explode it. But so before I explode it, I want to make sure that I have this exactly where I want it to be and I have it to the right precision and everything. So I would double click on this and I would say 2x and a space. And so there we go. We have the radius of 0.75 in there. I would also want to put a dimension in between this point right here, which I could go over here to like that edge, and this edge right here. I want to put a 0.75 in there. And again, I would want that distance from the edge to here to be 0.4. So a good way to do that is just to pick on your dimension and drag it right there, and then pick and hold down with your left button and drag straight out, and then let go and type 0.4 and press enter. All right. So we're getting this, set up. This would be probably going to have to be a 2x, right? And the reason for that is that we have the same thing going on over here. So we have the radius of 2x. We've got this distance right here. The other dimension we need in here, if you look at the slots, is we have this arc right here that has a radius of 0.375. So I would use the radius command again, and I would pick right here, and I would bring that out. You could even go and acquire that point and make sure you could line them up at the same place, kind of pick right there. Now, how many of those arcs are there? Well, there's 4 of them. So you double click on it, and I would type 4x in a space. And then also they're taken to 3 decimal places. It's 0.375. So I would pick on that, right click my mouse, go up to precision and go pick 3, like that. All right. So you'll see all this in the video, but that's part of what we're trying to do here. Now, the last thing I wanted to show you was how to fix some of this other stuff up. And there's something I want to do before I do that. Like I said, we need to have a gap right in there. The other thing on a large radius like that, I prefer that the arrow actually come from the center mark and point out. So I'm going to show you that. I'm going to pick on this and highlight that dimension right there. And then I'm going to pick on this tab right up here that says annotate. And what I have set right now, the style that I have of my dimension was called ASME Small Radii. Well, I didn't get into this, but I also made one called ASME Large Radii. Now look at the difference. When I move over onto this, look what happens to the arrow. So if I pick, and I just put this dimension right there on the large radii style, you'll be able to see that it puts that large radius in there. Now, I still want to have my center mark. If for some reason my setting pulled back when I did that, I don't like that it did that. There must be something to do with the small radii setting. But remember, you still have this setting over here, which is your center mark style. And you can pick on that, and that will put your center marks in as well. Now, if I exploded that dimension, or if I use this tool, I can actually edit this and pull it down like that, because I want to have that gap in there, and I want that gap to be the same. So I may have to, drag that up just a little bit and kind of mess around with that right there to get that the way I want it. Okay. All right. So let's talk about your assignment. Your assignment is on page 296. That's your first one. And then you're going to also be doing the assignments on 297, 298, and 299, because you're going to mention all 4 of the views, or all 4 of the objects you drew last week. And that's what we're going to be working on this week. I've made a video for each one of these, and you'll be able to link to that video out of Blackboard. But let me click on Blackboard, pardon me, and see if I can still broadcast. I think I can if I minimize this guy. All right, so you go to Blackboard and you click on Chapter 5, and it's going to take you here. Now, I want to point something out to you. I made a bunch of videos about dimensioning. It's so important that it's really important that you watch these videos. And the first ones are on what I talked about today, which was just about dimensioning, just general dimensioning considerations. And I've broken into 3 parts, so each of these videos is not that long. So what I would recommend is that you watch the first 3 videos here, And then on Wednesday, I'm going to talk about tolerancing, which is really the crux of dimensioning, is understanding tolerancing. So if you want to watch all these videos, you can, but you really understand how designers figure out what the dimensions should be when you watch the tolerancing videos. There's even a quick reference PDF on dimensioning mechanical drawings. And then I made a PDF called The Do's and Don'ts of Dimensioning Flashcards, which is pretty cool. I mean, it tells you things like, it reminds you, you go through these rules and it says, don't dimension to hidden lines, don't dimension the center of hidden features like holes and things like that. And so it's like a set of like 20 flashcards that help you decide how to dimension things. And then these are the required assignments. You're going to dimension 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, and 5.4. The first one is dimensioning the bracket. So you're going to click on that. And then you just follow the steps. So the first one says to create a dimension layer. So you're going to open the bracket drawing, create a new layer named dimensions, and set that layer current. And it should be default line weight. Then you're going to create a dimension style. And these are the settings. And there's a video right here on creating an ASME dimension style. I would recommend clicking on that and having AutoCAD open and following that to see how to set up this dimension style. Then it says add dimensions to the bracket. Watch this video. So this is the video I made on dimensioning the bracket project. I recommend watching that video while you place your dimensions on the bracket. And remember, like I said, you need to have every one of these dimensions, including that note right there, and they should all be dimensioned from the same edges, or so this part's symmetrical, so sometimes like we'll dimension from this edge to the center of that hole. We may dimension from this edge to the center of this hole. There's a lot of symmetry in this part. Okay. Print the project as directed. Now, here's the thing I want you guys to do, and this is an important part of this. When you finish dimensioning the bracket, I want you to print it as a PDF. Now, I know some of you don't have the Adobe PDF right here, but if you pick on this down arrow there, what you're going to see is the AutoCAD PDF printer. So you're going to see AutoCAD 2 PDF. Pick that one instead and print the sheet with the dimensions on it. And then what I want you to do is I want you to send me that as a PDF. Okay? So when you finish the bracket, print it as a PDF and send it to me. Now, here's the good part. When you send it to me and I see that you've done the best that you can to dimension it, and I don't imagine it's going to be perfect, but it should be pretty good because you're watching the video. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to send you back a PDF with the solution on it. And by that I mean, we call this a check print. I'm going to send you a PDF back of those views with the dimensions as it should be dimensioned if you're dimensioning it and you want to make like 100 on the project. Okay? So what I want you to do at that point is to compare your drawing to what I'm sending you in the check print. And if you see mistakes in yours, you need to change those mistakes. Then what you want to do, once you have all your changes made, is send it back to me and as a PDF again. And that's the PDF I'm going to grade. All right. So the workflow is dimension your bracket as best you can, put your notes in and everything else by following the video, print that as a PDF and send it to me. I will send, when I see that you've dimensioned it, I'm going to send back the check print. Like I said, the check print is one where all the dimensions are correct and they're in the right place and they're spaced properly and everything else. You're going to compare your drawing to the check print and make changes if you need to. When you make your changes, you're going to reprint that as another PDF and send it to me, and that's what I'm going to grade. What I want to do is grade that and send it back to you right away so that you can see if you're making mistakes. because I don't want you to repeat those mistakes on the next projects that are coming up. That's why I want to do this with the bracket first and get the check print and get the grade right on it. Then you'll go on to dimension the others, and hopefully you won't be repeating the same mistakes. That's why I want you to get that feedback from me early, okay? So I do want to grade the bracket and then get it back to you. So if anybody has any questions about how it works, okay, so you draw it, you dimension it, you print it as a PDF, you send that to me. I'm going to send you the check print. You'll make your changes looking at the check print. Then you will you'll print it again as a PDF and send it back to me. That's what you're going to get a grade on. So you're going to get 4 grades this week in your daily work. And these are important grades because these are ones where you're putting together chapters 4 and 5. So you're putting your views together with your dimensions. You're going to learn a lot this week, okay? So the last thing I want to point out to you guys is when the course started, I recommended that you get a highlighter. And so what I think it's really important to do is that as you place a dimension on your drawing, you highlight it. And then as you place the next dimension, you highlight that dimension. And you want to make sure that every dimension on this drawing is highlighted. And that's the way people do it out there in the real world. They do not want to leave a dimension off. So the highlighter, you go in and you highlight that you've put it on there. And when you highlight it, you need to check and think about, did you write 2x? Did you go to 3 decimal places? Did you put the R in there and go to 2 decimal places here? If so, you would highlight that. And so what I recommend doing is highlight this as you put those dimensions on the AutoCAD drawing. Then after you have your PDF, compare the PDF to this sketch and highlight it again. Just make sure that you've got everything on there and it's all the same precision. Highlight that note right down there that says mild steel. Make sure that you have that on there. Fill out your title block. And of course your title block should have the scale, which is, in this case, I think the scale's already put in there. It's going to be 1 to 2, even though we're printing it 1 to 1. So that's it. This is what you're going to be doing starting today. You're going to work on the bracket first, okay? So I would recommend opening it up, clicking on chapter 5 over here in Blackboard. And like I say, I really think it's important to watch these videos here on Dimensioning Basics. There's a quick reference PDF. You might open it up. You might open these do's and don'ts flashcards, and then you're going to start dimensioning the bracket. And just remember, there are videos for the whole thing. Like there's this video on creating a dimension style and a video on dimensioning it. Now, you're going to do that for all 4 of the projects, but focus on the bracket first and get it to me, okay? So with that, I think I'm done. I'm just going to stay online here for another 45 minutes or so. If anybody has any questions, or if you want to ask a question now, just unmute and ask. Otherwise, I'm going to stick around. If not, if y'all are leaving now, have a great day, and I will see you on Wednesday. What I would recommend that you do by Wednesday for sure is dimension the bracket and the shaft guide. Get those done. And then that will leave the other 2 for starting Wednesday through next Monday, okay? Because you need to dimension all 4 of these in 1 week. And there's videos for all 4 of them. All right. If you're leaving, have a great day. I'm going to stop sharing right now. And otherwise, I'll see you on Wednesday at 11 o'clock. And feel free to send me email if you get stuck or something. But remember, get this drawing done and send me a PDF of it so that I can send you the check print. Great. Have a good day. Yes. Yes. Well, what's happening there is, you want me to project my screen real quick? Let me see if I can project my screen. Well, like right here, you mean that gap? Is that like an example of what you're talking about? Are you seeing this, by the way? I may not be present. You are? Okay, so what I mean is that if you dimension to the center like that, oh, you can't, I'm sorry. Let me hang on and I'll present it to you. Okay, let me stop presenting it. I think I was presenting the wrong thing. Let's go here. All right, can you see it now? Okay, so what I was talking about is, we dimension to the quadrant. Is that what you're asking about right there? Oh, you mean right here? How big that? I don't know. Where? Uh huh. So you're saying I don't think I understand. Do you want to present something to me? Do you have something you can send to me? I'm going to stop presenting, and so down at the bottom, you need to pick on just present now. There you go. Okay. I see. Uh huh. Okay. Well, see, yeah, you don't. Mm-hmm. No, but you see, what you need there is that center line that you have coming across. Why don't you erase it out and I'll show you something. Not that line, but the center line in the center of your hole there. Just delete that out. Just go that that the center line that goes through the hole. Yeah, right there. Delete that. Just take all of those out that go across there. In fact, take all of your center. There you go. Yeah, just delete those guys out. Okay. Now, if you go over to your dimension tools, so go straight up where it says annotation. You see if you move straight up there, it says annotation on your ribbon. Okay. Okay. So you see keep going straight up. There is a dimension, no, at the top. It's go up. Go up higher. Keep going. There you go. Now go over to your right a little bit and go straight up one more. Okay, pick on that down arrow. Pick on that down arrow right there. There you go. Now come down here where it says diameter. Go straight down until you pick diameter. Okay, now pick on the large circle, the larger circle. Just pick that. You see how I put a center mark in there when you put your diameter on there? So it's probably going to be better to put a center mark in doing it that way. Now, you don't have your dimension style set up correctly yet. It doesn't look like to me. So did you follow the video on making this? Okay, well, it doesn't look like your dimension style is set up correctly yet. Yeah, I think that the dash lines in the center of that and everything should be a lot bigger on that center mark. If it were set correctly, I don't think it's set correctly yet. So what you need to do is go to your dimension style. Do you have a dimension style you can open? There you go. So go to modify. All right, go to your lines tab up there. Let's see what lines. Or I'm sorry. Go to symbols and arrows. It'll be in symbols and arrows. Okay, right there where it says center mark size, move up where it says 0.09. Yeah, go right into there and type. Let me see what that's supposed to be. Type 2 right there. So you've got it set for, yeah, right. You have it set, yes, 2, because it's 2 millimeters. All right, now pick OK, and then pick Close. You see the difference? So you have to make sure you have all your settings right. And those settings are on page 297. And they're also, I think the video shows you how to do all your settings. Those are going to have to be set correctly for this to work right, okay? All right, so you really need to watch the video, because I know in the video it's going to show you where you ought to dimension things, and it's going to help you get your dimension style set up and all. Uh-huh. Now look, there is no gap. There's no gap. No. Right. You don't need a gap. You do not need a gap. Yes. Yeah, that looks good. That's the way it should be. So the gap is, yeah, you should not have that gap you've got right there. But you should have that gap around your center mark. Yes. With the dimensions, not important. Yes, you're correct. Okay. Okay. You're welcome anytime. Okay, bye-bye.